three. Many people's surprise, there was a rather successful ministerial, and it managed to agree on some important decisions. An agreement to cut fishery subsidies, which was the first time, as Dr. Ngozi mentioned at the opening of this event, first time ever that there was actually a multilateral agreement concerning sustainability issues. There was a framework for allowing easier access to vaccine, a small patent waiver. There was a renewal on the moratorium for the ban on duties of e-commerce, a commitment to limit or to try to limit export controls to address the emerging food crisis and to exclude the World Food Programme from any restrictions. And there was an agreement to start working on a reform program or a roadmap of all aspects of WTO to be reported by 2024. So the theme of this week is from ambition to action. So if this was not enormous, but still very important decisions, showing also that WTO is alive and kicking and that member states can take the responsibility under very, very difficult circumstances, wars, pandemics, global challenges. This was a positive signal to the world. Now, of course, the day after, when everybody had left, where are we then? What has happened since? You all are participants in different working groups and different discussions. So you are so well placed to share with us how it is going. So why don't we start with Ambassador Parola? Where are we after the... No, you, age and beauty. Where are we after MC12? You don't have to go through everything, but you mentioned how has the work kicked off after that? We have the summer recess, but of course, lots of deadlines and lots of tasks to deliver to the capitals.
Thank you so very much. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'll try to be very brief so we have time for questions should there be any questions. Let me begin by the title of the session about trade wins. I hope two things happen. First is that the wins are not wins of the past.
There seems to be a problem with the headphones.
So that's fine. I'll do that later.
Oh, the translators.
I can speak in Portuguese.
So there's an echo. Can we do something about that?
Yeah.
It happened as well. Yeah, but everybody's full. I think all the microphones are switched.
Like yesterday, something did.
Okay, we'll try.
I don't care.
Well, we'll try.
Hello? Is it working? Is that working?
Lots of things are coming from Washington, some good, some bad. Ambassador?
Should I? Okay,
yes,
thank you. So let me begin by making reference to the title of the session, Trade Wins. So first, I hope that the wins are not wins of the past. Second, let me refer to a famous quote by Seneca, which is, if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. So we need a goal. We need to know where we're going to so that the trade winds can help us. Let me refer very briefly to how I see the path forward MC13 on the basis of what we could achieve during MC12. The sheer fact that MC12 took place and could achieve results is wonderful. I mean, if you just take a look at the headlines 1 week before, all catastrophic. It's going to be a major flop, nothing will happen. And then we pulled through. It was a good result. Was it a wonderful result? No, but it was a good result. and we achieved good results in many areas. To have a legal text on subsidies related to sustainability is in itself a wonderful result. To be able to have a flexible result about some interests so contentious like TRIPS waiver, the TRIPS protection, is also very something to be commended. So I think it was good. We also had domestic regulation. There's not too many people talking about that, but it's a very, very important result. I think it should be emphasized that the JSIs, they moved along, they moved ahead. It's very positive in e-commerce, essentially e-commerce and trade investment facilitation for development. So it was a good MC12. Did we solve all the problems of the world? No. But we certainly took a positive step forward. That's the first comment I would make. As we head to the MC13, we have immediate milestones. We have in December, if I'm not mistaken, the first deadline, which is to define the scope of the waiver. And this is being debated. I hope we'll be able to achieve something by then. Another thing is to achieve the 2/3 of ratifications so that the fisheries agreement come into force. I see a lot of commitment here. Delegations are engaged. In Brazil, the legislature is already taking a look at that. So we have moved ahead very firmly and with a lot of determination. I don't think there's any demand for legal review of the tax. We had the clear understanding that that was the final tax. There's no demand for legal review. So I think we should be able to move ahead on those things. And then let's go straight ahead to what is missing, because it's the agricultural package. And why was it not possible to achieve something in agriculture? For many reasons. The first reason is that it's very complicated in itself. I mean, you can afford not to buy a new iPhone, but you cannot afford not to buy food. So, and food insecurity costs jobs and political jobs. It's a very contentious issue. It's very tricky to negotiate this. There's a reason why Article 20 of the AOA has never progressed too far. But at the same time, the absence of a clear result in itself is a good result, because now we have clean slates. We have one clear mandate, which is Article 20, and that's it. And then we're free to renegotiate and to find creative ways to achieve something in agriculture. So this is also another important aspect to stress. As we think broadly about MC13, I see there are at least two challenges. The first one is to redefine the notion of development. For too long, development in this organization has been associated to the mandates of the Doha Round. No, Doha Round is a tool. The real thing is development. If the tool is not working, we should abandon the goal. So we need to redefine the notion of development and bring development to the center of our debates, because this is what's making globalization weak. The feeling that the race to the bottom and is severe and prosperity is not equally shared. So the lack of political consensus and the political basis for globalization derives in a large part from that. As we look today to the old divide between developing and developed, within societies, you have levels of underdevelopment within rich societies. If you travel to very rich capitals today, it's shocking to see how many people are sleeping on the streets. As the winter approaches, it's also shocking to see that many rich countries face the challenge of keeping their populations fed and warm. This is a world that is politically not sustainable. So development has to be center of MC13, the debate in MC13. How do we approach that? Two very small steps. The first one, I think a lot of attention should be given to LDCs. I mean, they deserve a lot of attention, and they need to be part of everything we do here. Another small example of priorities that we should bear in mind for MC13, Cotton 4. It's been for too long that Cotton 4 is an unsolved issue. It's time we give a concrete political answer to the needs of countries such as those. But this is not the main agenda. The main agenda is to be able to negotiate on the basis of more flexible approaches. I listened with respect and with a lot of interest to criticisms about flexible multilateralism is what I have been calling, because the plurilaterals is a taboo word here. So let's avoid the word plurilateral. Let's go for flexible multilateralism. And I see a lot of criticism about, oh, we're going to fragment the system. I'm sorry, the system is already fragmented and it's paralyzed. So unless you understand the obstruction is good for you, you should be ready to engage in new forms of negotiation. And this is one of the things that we are very committed to. And a flexible multilateralism may work in many areas, in agriculture, but also in e-commerce, in creating jobs, in many things. I mean, nothing should, I think it's surprising when I say, oh, this is illegal. What is the next step? Is it going to be illegal to negotiate? I mean, we're here to negotiate. If you're not happy with that, okay, don't engage. I mean, nobody's forcing you. I mean, nobody should force me to negotiate, but nobody should be in a position to prohibit me from negotiating. So this is one clear mandate for MC13, and I hope we can arrive there with those notions more mature. A final comment that I think is important, I think we need also to redefine what we understand by food security. And that we should avoid at all costs to use the broad argument of food security as an excuse for closing markets. Food security needs local production, of course, but local production also needs open markets. So we need to make sure that we bring tariff barriers down, that we keep markets open, that things will be transparent, that the levels of subsidy will be transparent, and a reduction of subsidies. Not only the old ones, but also the new ones. I think that the worst thing that could happen, for instance, for a country such as mine, is to have to face the old protectionism and the new protectionism. Then we find ourselves in a very uncomfortable position. But I look forward to MC13 with optimism. There's no reason to despair. I think we have moved ahead in MC12, and we should be able to keep moving on, step by step. But thank you.
Thank you very much for that. There was optimism, but also caution. Ambassador Anzén, Mikael, how do you see the steps from June to 2024 if everything goes as planned for the next MC13? And what needs to be done for that?
Thank you, Cecilia and Peterson Institute and everybody being here. Thanks, Alexander. You set the scene very good. I would just make a short comment to your initial question here. First of all, as you said, and as we all said, MC12 was a success. It really was. And I think we should digest that for quite a while, not for a while, but we must just digest it and look ahead. So actually what happened, just to make a snapshot of what I see from June until now and ahead, this success, now we must look ahead. We started already in July with some meetings here, digesting what we saw and heard. We also reflected on the results and started to see how the work should be organized ahead. Now you're all here. We have the public forum. I think this is very important and a good step in our common work here in the WTO, because we are listening to what you are saying. So what you're saying in different panels will actually come into the negotiations, hopefully. Then we all have to set up now, and Alexander, George, you were also organizing a retreat on agriculture. We heard the importance of agriculture. There was no result on agriculture in MC12. So my point of view, that's the most important issue, pressing issue. And I think that will be the one that we will focus upon for this fall. And then, Alexander, you put the other issues ahead, and we are on top of things now, and to go forward until MC13. I stop here.
Thank you very much. Atalaya, Ambassador, what's your views on this? Obviously, of course, agriculture is very important for Africa, for Botswana, and that was missing, even if we should not forget what we actually did, or what you actually did achieve at this. One other thing that were no results, and I know that this has been very important for Botswana, is gender and trade, where you have been pushing for that. I was in Buenos Aires, where so many countries, over 100 countries, decided to work for this, and MC12 was a moment to take stock. Now, there were so many other things that didn't happen, but this is an issue, of course, to move forward. But how do you see the road from MC12 to MC13?
Well, thank you very much, Cecilia, and good afternoon, morning, whichever time zone you might be in virtually. So thank you for the invitation. Yeah, look, the Geneva package, as we might want to call it, which we all adopted at MC12. I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have said, you'll get bored. I think it's a set of unprecedented results that we can all be proud of. But of course, we also all admit that the clock did not stop on the 17th of June. On the contrary, it started ticking and ticking fast. So we appreciate the mountain of work before us. I think that colleagues here in Geneva, WTO members know this, and we already had it work. I think you've already heard about some of the things we are doing with facilitation by the chairperson of the General Council, chairpersons of the relevant WTO bodies, and the DG. I think you will have also heard that we've had several meetings as members on some of the discussions or the decisions that were mentioned by you, Cecilia. Some have clear timelines, some have clear guidance for implementation, some need more discussion among members, but I am optimistic that, we will deliver as WTO members as promised, given this renewed sense. And I think you can probably tell that we have a renewed sense of some more trust, collegiality, as well as the willingness of all of us to engage. Gender. I wouldn't say, Cecilia, that we had no result on women and trade or gender and trade, or even that we had a poor one. Maybe my experience in life generally, or maybe negotiations at multilateral level in particular, has taught me to look at the cup as half full rather than as half empty. It's an admission I would not make 30 years ago. In the case of gender issues, the result, of course, was different from what we had wanted to work towards initially. But this is the nature, once again, of multilateral negotiations. We engaged each other, ideas which were not on the negotiating table came up, and we had to accommodate the interests of everyone. And I'm not saying we are excited about the result, but we managed to get some text into the outcome document. The good news is, of course, that more than 120 WTO members, representing 75% of the WTO membership, are part of the informal working group on gender, a new group, and they are committed to deliver on Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is about gender equality. Botswana, El Salvador, and Iceland, as co-chairs of this working group. At MC12, we issued a statement where we highlighted the achievements of WTO members, all the work that we are doing together, and reaffirmed our commitment to advancing gender equality in trade. Of course, the not so good news is that ministers were addressing other life-threatening and competing issues, your TRIPS waivers and so on, in a very tough negotiating environment. So it was not possible to translate ambition to action on this issue. But it did not happen, of course, at MC12. I'm confident it will happen at MC13.
That is very good news. Thank you for that. And you're right, you should consider the glass as half full, even if we're not fully content with the outcome. It can always be better. Ambassador Mina, George, what's your views on this, and what's the road forward on a short-term and medium-term basis?
Well, firstly, Cecilia, this extraordinary show here of interest, engagement, enthusiasm at the Public Forum is very heartening to see. It shows, I think, the significance of the global trade regime to our world at the moment, to see the level and the quality of the engagement here this week. Can also thank you for your contribution to the multilateral trading system over many years. I think clearly we do have wind in our sails. I mean, this is a very positive moment after the second fully multilateral treaty in the history of the organisation. I think that's been an extraordinary success with the fisheries subsidies package. I think we've also got a whole range of other promising areas of future work, whether it be on the rulemaking agenda or on the WTO reform agenda, where we got a new mandate. We've been talking about WTO reform in many other contexts, other fora, but this is finally at the centre of our activity here in Geneva, which is a good thing. So just to look at both of those lenses, Cecilia, and to take your question, I think on the rulemaking side, I think we've got some real opportunities now on subsidies, and subsidies is becoming a much bigger issue, a very technical issue, of course, but a much bigger issue the global trade regime as the incentives. I mean, remember, subsidies are effectively about incentives that go to issues that matter to the global commons. Alexandra spoke very eloquently earlier about the impact of subsidies on food security and the distortions that it impacts negatively on food security. Subsidies also in agriculture can have a very negative impact on our environment and sustainability objectives. We know that subsidies lead to increased greenhouse gas emissions. We're not going to get to net zero if we don't deal with a quarter of global emissions that are emerging from subsidies. And we know that, of course, the $800 billion that is contributed every year to agricultural markets does have a deleterious impact on greenhouse gas issues. So we really need to deal with the massive problem that is global agriculture subsidies. But of course on fisheries, where we've had a big fillip to the sustainability of our oceans, and where in a region like Australia's region, the Pacific, where for many of our neighbours, island states depend very heavily on fishing for their sustainable, for their future economic development, this is a big fillip for their economic prospects. And we've got to implement, we've got to have this agreement enter into force as soon as possible. That's absolutely this first short-term priority we've got to look at if we're going to take advantage of that major deal. On the institutional reform front, again, taking the lens back a bit, we've got a big opportunity ahead of us. Of course, we need to look at ways to reinforce, as we've said in our mandate, a fully functioning dispute settlement system to ensure the continued authority of global trade law. This a fundamental aspect of the rules-based order, a world in which power is blunted in the conduct of international economic affairs. That's what this place brings to the rules-based order, and a very big contribution it is. So we've got to protect that, nurture it, and restore the full functionality of the dispute settlement system. But there's other work we need to do. We've got to find ways, as others said today, to drive rulemaking and make it more effective and more efficient. There are many ways to multilateralism, and sometimes it's confused with unanimity. Multilateralism, unanimity of agreement. I think you've written about this yourself, Cecilia, just after MC12. Unanimity to start projects, unanimity to implement projects, unanimity to extend the benefits of those projects. That's not necessarily the case. We know that the history of the multilateral trading system is one where we've moved in concentric circles, and we should continue to look for opportunities to do that, to drive rulemaking in ways that matter to global business on issues like services, as Alexandra's already mentioned, where we've got a big success under our wings, and of course on digital trade, where we've got a very significant project underway here to update the rulebook.
Thank you for that. A quick follow-up on subsidies. You mentioned agricultural subsidies, which has been a difficult issue for many, many years. And also we saw an avalanche of subsidies during the COVID crisis, some perfectly legitimate, others are still lingering. And we've also seen many countries engaging in subsidizing and industrial policy and so on. Can the lessons from the fishery subsidy negotiations sort of spill over in a positive way to deal with other kinds of subsidies, in your view?
We're certainly looking forward to hearing others' views on this, but I think that's an excellent point. We have just seen the world deal with an issue of importance to the global commons on the subsidies to overfishing that stimulate overfishing, that have seen the depletion of stocks effectively see many species, the majority of species, fish species, drop to levels that are around 50% of where they had been before. So we're dealing with quite a technical economic issue in a manner that delivers for the global commons. And I think that mindset brought to issues such as food security, such as climate change, will see us driving further on this important agenda, can also recognise the extraordinarily important cross-institutional work, Cecilia, that's being done by the World Bank, IMF, OECD and the WTO together in mapping the global subsidies problem. A remarkably useful and concise report earlier this year on this subject, which everyone should read. It does deliver, I think, something of an important commencement of an evidence base for further work in this area.
Thank you very much. We will let you in soon. Just wanted to have one other round. We've touched upon the concrete subjects that we need to deal with, and then there's also in parallel, of course, the institutional framework that needs to be reformed for WTO to be fit for purpose, but also to be able to function. On the reform agenda, what would be the most important issues you would like to raise, Cecilia?
But look, I mean, the reform agenda, I'm sorry, the reform agenda clearly is a priority for all of us. And I think that George mentioned it now, and I know that for all WTO members, there is no doubt that the reform agenda will be a priority to work on immediately. I mean, and we do, of course, have a deadline under our paragraph 4 of the outcome document. And as chairperson currently of the dispute settlement body, clearly I have a very strong interest and wish that this move ahead. I mean, obviously the appellate body impasse is a matter of concern for all WTO members. So I can confidently say that dispute settlement should be a priority on the WTO agenda. That paragraph, as you know, acknowledges the urgency of dealing with this important issue. The deadlock can, I believe, and will be solved. 164 ministers made a firm commitment to have a fully and well-functioning dispute settlement system accessible to all members by 2024. And I quote it very deliberately because it is a commitment. So I think that work is already intensifying in this regard. There are a number of proposals on the table. Members are working together to ensure that we have an outcome that addresses the outcomes of everyone. So I think that we are definitely committed as WTO members, and that this is a priority, there is no doubt. The how is something that we have to talk about and to agree on, but we need to move sooner rather than later. Let me put it that way. Yes.
And you think the political will is there?
I believe so. I do.
I was in a panel this morning where we discussed WTO reform, Mikael, and there was a member of the audience who said that reform is important, but don't overdo it so it loses focus, which I think was a valid point. How do you balance between the necessary institutional reforms to be able to cope with, climate change and subsidies and all the other items on the agenda and the citizens' expectations of global ruling without over-egging the pudding, as my British friends used to say?
Thank you, Cecilia. I think there are a lot of people in the Secretariat here that have a lot of ideas on the reform, but I will give you my point of view, and I will bring up two things that I think is missing in this discussion. And that is the sort of institutional reform, which you alluded to, and also the business sector participation. So start with the institutional reform. That's our in-house work, and a lot of you don't work here, but I do. We sit in the meetings, and I see things that I don't think work, and that's why we have hard times to come to result. I think most of you know how a governmental administration works or other international organizations, that you actually start often, as in the climate negotiations, you start with a research report that then is discussed on an expert level, then on a little bit higher level on deputy level, then to senior level, to finally be pushed to the politicians for a decision. Anytime if people cannot agree on different levels, it's pushed back, reworked upon, and then up again. This kind of elevating system, we don't have it here. You have experience from Brussels. I think it works pretty well there. It works in Stockholm, and I guess you have the same in Brazil. But we don't work like this here. So here we have a glitch between what we say we are doing and how we should work. And we have the standard regular committees, the councils, the general councils, and the ministerial meetings. But we don't use the system, at least not the system that I'm used to. So I think this should be looked upon with all our smart common brains here to look upon this. The other point I will make is the business sector participation. I'm so glad to see so many business sector participants here today and throughout the public forum. It's great. I've been listening a lot to you. A lot of wise had been said, wise words, and a lot of input. But when public forum is over, you're not here any longer. We can laugh about it, but for me, it's very strange. And people say that, well, you deal with that on a domestic level. It's true, we deal with that in Sweden, but I don't know how it works in other countries. And I guess it doesn't work 100% in all countries. So I think there could be compelling arguments to have a structured dialogue with business. We have it here during these days, and we hear this input. So both on a very technical level, when we are elevating different tasks, having input on different negotiations, either agriculture and e-commerce, and then, of course, on a more structural level, what could be interesting. So those would be my reflecting remarks on things we could bring into this reform agenda. I stop here.
But that seems slightly easier to solve than solving the whole dispute settlement crisis in a way. I mean, inviting people in a more regular basis doesn't demand big decisions, or is it me who don't understand how it works, or working in slightly different ways with the research reports? Try something else. Or is this a very naive comment for a non-WTO negotiator?
No, it's just that I think it's two sides of the coin here. One is the input from business side, yeah. that we don't have that on the structured form today. And when we talk about dispute settlement body, well, I think that is handled on the sidelines. I mean, that's another issue. That's even a separate part of the reform discussion because it's such a big issue. So I think we can handle that aside.
Alexander, you in your introductory remark, you talked about flexible multilateralism instead of plurilaterals and so on. And that sounds like a much more inclusive concept in a way. Do you think that could be the solution for handling current issues, but also those who are knocking on the door, like more sustainability issues, climate-related issues, etc., and the whole issue of values related to trade, where obviously not all members are ready to go in the same speed, but many still want to move forward there. Would this be a sort of new working way, or do we have to institutionalize this in a much more formal way?
Thank you very much. That's the crucial question. Before replying straightforward to that, let me say plurilaterals or flexible multilateralism, they're not an alternative to multilateral. They complement. Mm-hmm. They may be a way forward. Mm-hmm. And that would actually be, that's in the DNA of this institution. If you look at the codes of the Tokyo Round, and I hesitate to mention this in front of you, such a specialist, and if you look at the history of how this organization evolved, what is the function of MFN if it's not to widen the scope of things that were decided by a group of members? If everything has to be multilateral from the beginning, you don't need MFN. It's redundant. So it's in the DNA of this institution to be flexible about those things. That's the first comment I would make. From this point of view, why should we be stopped to have 20, 50 members to agree on something? I mean, the famous balance of rights and obligations would be preserved. But those 50 want to move ahead. And this is valid not only for new issues, but also to old issues. So let me go back to agriculture. Why shouldn't we be able to negotiate a sectoral in agriculture? And not only in agriculture. And the example I always give is a sectoral for protein, for instance. That would include NAMA, the old NAMA, who remembers that? Yeah, so do I. So NAMA, services, and ag. And that would be transversal. It would be a wonderful thing, I guess. It's difficult to achieve, but I think it could reach critical mass. It could reach an important number of members. On the more recent issues, e-commerce. if you're not comfortable with having your economy ruled by multilateral norms in e-commerce, okay, it's your national choice. I don't think you should stop members from having their own national development strategies. That would be a mistake. But those national choices should not stop me from having a different choice. So e-commerce is a very clear example. Why shouldn't, and now I guess it's 10 members already, 100 members. Why shouldn't 100 members be allowed to move ahead? It's inclusive, it's transparent, it's open. So what's wrong with that? I think you should, and I have been using this verb maybe too much, to de-dramatize the debate. Let's look at things more at face value and let's see what they really mean. We're not bringing the system down. We're not saying multilateralism doesn't work. No. We just say, well, maybe this is an easy way to advance and let's see how we move ahead. And the more success this has, the more the multilateral system will be reinforced and strengthened, because the perception will be created that we are able to offer concrete results to people. So it's a pragmatic thing. It's not an ideological approach to the world. It's a pragmatic, it's whatever works. And I think this works.
Yes, and eventually there would be a certain price to pay if you choose to be outside, because you lose some of the advantages. I wanted to let you in. If there are questions here, I'm sure these very qualified ambassadors can talk for a long time, and I have plenty of questions, but I know there's so much competence here in the room. So why don't we take a few questions and then you can answer one or two of them, starting with you.
Emily Rees from the European Centre for International Political Economy. We heard about the WTO reform, fisheries, food security, agriculture, gender, digital trade. I mean, what a plethora of topics. What I didn't hear today is trade and health, and particularly the WTO response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Evidently, the discussion around the TRIPS waiver has been a hugely contentious one. And I believe many ambassadors are quite tired at this stage of this discussion. But effectively, there is a new deadline now to discuss the extension of the waiver to diagnostics and therapeutics by the end of this year. And I wanted to know, what is your outlook for this topic? Have we put it to sleep with MC12? Is that why we're not discussing it further, or is the question of waivers to intellectual property still one that is going to carry over into the next round?
That's a very good question. You had a question as well, ma'am?
Oh, please. Well, I'm Swelma Hase. I'm head of corporate affairs for Unilever Latam. And coming back to the agenda on how private sector could better participate and bring in inputs to the trade negotiations, but mostly to how to design the rules. I'd like to hear maybe from Ambassador Parola, what could be done? Because this is something that we have been lagging behind for a long time.
Thank you very much for that. Anybody else at this stage? Yes, sir.
Emmanuel Wachendo from the Institute of Economic Affairs, a Kenyan think tank. And my question to the panel concerns the prioritization of issues. So, for example, we talk about digitization, we talk about climate change, even institutional reform in the WTO. So my question would be, is there room to actually propose us a very clear and explicit prioritization of issues, and even a prioritization that takes into account, say, the resource constraints that different countries face? So say maybe some countries can postpone their meeting some of these, like say climate change objectives, for example. What do you see in terms of this angle of the debate, of the consideration, just prioritization? Thank you.
Thank you for that complex question, but important. So, Alexander?
Yeah, thank you. Just to make sure I answer to the question correctly, I understood your question as how can the private sector work more closely? Yeah, show up, call us, organize meetings, be around. come to the forum. We have been having many virtual calls and meetings with the private sector. And private sector at large, private sector is not only business, it's everyone. It's everyone who's not a civil servant is private sector. Because what we do here matters. I think that a big mistake about the WTO is to imagine that we live in an ivory tower, that whatever we decide here is irrelevant. It's not. Our failure is relevant and our success is relevant. Let's make no mistake about this. So show up and we welcome you here.
And I can follow up on that, on my private sector comment, and as you referred to the Uruguay round, we all know and we heard that the final stage of the Uruguay round was a lot of thanks to the push from the private sector. So, and we don't see and feel that now. So that's one part of the game. The other is what Alexander just said. And the third that I'm kind of looking for is a structured dialogue where there is actually formalized meetings with between the WTO members and the private sector. I know what I'm saying now, there's no agreement in this house about this, but this is what I think is a missing piece. I don't say that I have a format for that today, but I think it could be worked upon. I think the OECD has a similar thing. We do have a structured dialogue within our capital. So, I mean, there are different ideas how this could be put forward. And I think a dialogue on how this could be done is one thing. On the question of the priority issues, I would say I don't put them in an order, in a certain order, because if you see what happened in the run-up to MC12, we had a bunch of issues. I think the success of the result is that we didn't put them 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we had them all on the table and we negotiated them all. And what was able to get an agreement, we finally made into a package. So my approach to this would be that we should keep a lot of issues on the table. But when they are ready, we harvest them. And then I come back to my other comment on the institutional setting. Today, we don't have an institutional setting to harvest things when they are done. We could do it in the General Council, but we don't. We wait for 2 or 4 or 6 years for Ministerial Conference to take place. So both harvest things at the General Council and when they are ready. So, and then Brazil has another proposal to have ministerial meetings as the World Bank and IMF on a yearly basis. I think that's another very good proposal to reflect upon. I stop here.
Just a note on that excellent question from Emmanuel, I think it was, on prioritization. I'd say, Emmanuel, there's a couple of layers to this. I mean, quite clearly there's a negotiation to be had before every ministerial conference, as Mikael said, political and diplomatic negotiation about priorities. There's also something else going on here that we can look at in the longer arc of time, and that is the shifting imperatives. This place has always contributed to economic development, economic efficiency through what it does for unleashing the benefits of trade. But increasingly, as governments start to value the imperative of environmental protection, climate mitigation, food security, yes, absolutely, public health, as the question is just asking, you know, those imperatives are rising. And we are seeing those, you call it priorities, but definitely different shifting imperatives coming to the fore. That's a good thing. And we're harnessing that in 2 main ways. We're harnessing it through new rule-making efforts. So digital trade is actually fundamentally about inclusion, making sure those who can't access global markets can access global markets with lower costs of trade, whether they be small and medium-sized enterprises or small economies who haven't been big participants in global trade. And the other side of the coin is something else that's new here in Geneva, and that is a shift solely concentrating on trade negotiations and starting to concentrate on policy, concentrate on dialogue. That's what we're seeing in the case of sustainability, where we're seeing a strong investment in dialogue by governments on trade and environment, on issues like plastics, building up policy learning and information sharing, which is a very important new strand of work here. So excellent question.
Thank you for that. Cecilia, want you to comment on the health question?
Yes, in more general terms, I'm not going to touch the TRIPS issues, and my country is too small to talk about these issues. I'm sorry to say, and that doesn't mean my country is not important. It's just that here at the WTO, we as smaller countries in the bigger scheme of things, we work within our regional groups. The Africa group has a clear position on this. I think it is well known. What I did want to say, though, Louise, is that the reason we didn't mention trade and health is not because it's not important. I think to all of us here, it is. And more so to someone like myself, coming from where I come from, not just Botswana, which is a developing country, Africa, a challenged continent, and developing countries generally. I do think that the linkages between trade and health really came to the forefront clearly as during the pandemic and the reaction of the world that we saw. And for us sitting where we were, it was clear that the whole vaccine inequity, first of all, it was clear that we can come to the party in terms of the research, the vaccines, and all these great things happen. But when it then comes to benefiting everybody, I think we all know what happened. And we in the developing world watched in horror as this was happening. And for us, this underlines the importance of our participation in organizations such as the WTO, that the WTO must ensure that development comes back to the center of the discussions. And talking about the stake that we all have, where we should not be looking at it with the lenses or spectacles of one organization. The collaboration between the different agencies here in Geneva. I mean, already the UN agencies don't coordinate among themselves. So the need for the different organizations, including the WTO, to work. And I think it's encouraging to see that the WIPO, WTO, WHO, some of us ambassadors here, I mean, I wear this WTO hat now. Tomorrow I could wear the WHO. The pandemic treaty that we are discussing and negotiating, I think it's all quite encouraging. And I think we have tried to learn the lessons. So going forward, I think we should be going in there with our eyes wide open, and we should, as a global community, realize that if we don't work together, we're going to perish together. And I think this is one place where, and the Secretariat really has a very important role to play here. I think not, only the WTO Secretariat, if you see how they are able to work together here in the Trade Hub, that is Geneva. And I think that we have the opportunities and we need to grab them and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very important point, I think, and also one that Dr. Ngozi is underlining, the importance of working more together with agencies here in Geneva, but also with the World Bank, OECD, IMF, other institutions as well, obviously, as the challenges are so interlinked. Are there any other questions that you're thinking about right now? Otherwise, I wanted to come back to the proposal on that Brazil has launched to meet on a regular basis. This might seem like a calendar issue, but it's actually quite important because this is a member-led organization, and you and your collaborators and the Secretariat do a fantastic job to prepare. But there needs to be that link between Geneva and the capitals and the ministers. And ministers have lots of things on their agenda. So, of course, WTO might not always be all they're thinking about. Some have, of course, better contacts, others could, there's more to do. But would this actually help, or rather be sort of delaying things if ministers involved on a more regular basis? Now we had 2 years without a ministerial because of the COVID, or 2.5 almost. But would it help to have ministers running around here much more often to really try to push and to be the basis of this groups of cooperation or flexible multilateralism? Because of course they are the ones who can really, bind up the countries as well in a way that you sometimes don't have the mandate to do.
Thank you, Siri. Thanks for the question. I didn't mention that because it would sound self-serving, but thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, let me go back to the verb de-dramatize, because that's the idea behind having an annual meeting. The IMF does, the World Bank does, so the General Assembly. So there's no reason, and it's not even written in Marrakesh. The 2 years are not mandatory. It's up to 2 years. So nothing stops us from meeting every year. Of course, it's going to be a different kind of ministerial. We should expect a package every year, because no, that would be way overstretching our ability to negotiate. But it would offer many positive aspects, we think. First is to put trade on the world agenda every year. Frankly, there's no reason why the World Economic Forum meets every year and we don't. So it would be good to have trade ministers here talking about how they see the world, sharing perspectives. And another thing is getting to know each other. Finance ministers know each other very well because they meet very often. Trade ministers, not so often. Another aspect is the distance, or the perceived distance, between the Geneva people and capital. And that's a gap that needs to be narrowed. None of us invent positions. We defend and represent positions. So it's important to bring people from capital so that they can better assess the difficulties, better explain the national positions, and build flexibilities into the negotiation. Every year we'll take the temperature, see, are we ready to get some result? Yes, wonderful. No, but that's also good because we spoke about issues. And I think this notion of a more regular meeting will help the process in Geneva during the year. That's my feeling.
Yeah, sorry for bringing it up, but I think it's an important point. I think the yearly annual meetings would also help to de-dramatize a little bit what we're doing here, because what we saw in the run-up to MC12 was 4.5 years ago, we have to have an agreement. It was a strange pressure building up in this city without knowing what the agreement would be or look like. Finally, it was very good, but so I believe that to dramatize and have an annual meeting, if things are ready, just put the gavel on the table, and we go and we continue after that, and then we have another annual meeting the year after. So I think that would help us. That's my personal point of view, but I stop.
What's your view? Do you have a specific view on this? Or
can I just add the couple of things that have been said? I totally agree with. There's an element of tending to the garden, an element of making sure that we are having senior political engagement on one of the most important multilateral regimes pretty regularly, looking not only at negotiating results, but also policies. I mentioned earlier, dialogue and so forth. But just if I can, Cecilia, add there's a human dimension to all this. What we realized through the pandemic was that trying to build up understanding and common purpose on a two by two screen, digitally, it is a lot lacking in that kind of context. The human dimension, understanding one another, listening to one another, and building a sense of common purpose can be incredibly important. The more that occurs, the better.
Yeah, look, I would have really no quarrel with our principals meeting more regularly and us getting to know each other and all that. But I think we do need to remember that for countries like ours, this is a huge challenge. It's extremely expensive. I mean, already, even with the meetings that we are attending, which is all the more reason why WTO must work. Because if it doesn't work, if we don't produce results, then where would we even get the resources as developing countries? I mean, first of all, if you look at the size of our missions here, we are not catching up. We are not able to participate as much as we would like to in all the different levels of meetings and negotiations. I mean, totally, our missions have very few people. The resources are overstretched. We service 12 UN agencies in addition to the WTO. Some of us are accredited bilaterally to Switzerland and a few other countries around here. So look, this is a reality. I think that, yes, in principle, these are good ideas and we can all agree as WTO members, but I think we just need to remember that some of us are would still not be able to participate as effectively as we would like to or as others would. And I know that being in an organization and supporting each other is also about sharing these challenges and seeing how we can help each other. Thank you.
That's an important aspect, of course. I just wanted, before we end, being in this room, I came to remember that almost exactly 6 years ago, I was in this room negotiating the environmental goods agreement. We were rather far. That was a plurilateral, and I don't know exactly how many members were involved, but I think that the topic of abolishing tariffs and making trade with environmental goods and services was sort of next to come. Easier is even more topical today than it was 6 years ago. At that time, the negotiations, well, they broke down for different reasons. Is there any possibility to revive that agreement? I mean, it is there. Lots of work has been done. We have learned so much. There is a pressure to do more on climate and environment. I know it's not on the formal agenda, but could we take it out of the closet?
Let's open doors, not close them.
Yes, Cecilia. I mean, there is work going on environment and climate. You have the trade and environmental structure discussion, the test, and there are many people looking into this trade and environmental goods and services, now adding services. So that's what we are working upon. So maybe you have to come back in a year or two and we might have an agreement.
Right, thank you very much. Many different areas have been covered. Of course, there's so much more to discuss, but this, I don't want to abuse your time, and we also must finish at 5. Thank you to those of you who have joined us online to listen. Sorry for not being able to take your questions this time. I'll promise to do better next time. Thank you so much to the ambassador here, Ambassador Mina, Ambassador Molokome, Ambassador Anzén, Ambassador Parola, to you who put questions, and all of you who came into this room and listened, and you heard all the ambassadors said, we need your impressions, we need your input, we need your presence, we need your pushing for reform and coming with ideas, not only this particular week in September, but all year round, actually. And then, of course, needs to discuss what kind of forum more we can engage with, but this is certainly very important. So thank you so much, all of you, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Cecilia.